Be'ezras Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Menachos Daf Zion, number 7. And we will just start just to review the Mishnah on Daf Vav and continue on with the Gemara on Daf Vav Amid Beis. But before we do that, let's just review. Part of the mincha, the service, is what's called a kamitza, where the kohen sticks his hand into the flour, in the flour bowl with the levina. He moves the levina aside. He just makes sure that his fingers grab almost a scoopful of flour and make sure that it's complete in his hand. And then he lifts his hand outward and he grabs it and he places it into another kli sharis. Okay, so this was a kli sharis, and then he places it into another kli sharis. Notice that there's another kohen holding on to the kli sharis as this kohen is placing the kaimitz into that bowl. We will discuss what would happen if there was no other kohen, if the bowl was on the table or on the floor. So we'll discuss that. But that's what the kamitza was. So the Mishnah said, so the Mishnah, let us review the Mishnah on Daf Vav Amud Aleph. The Mishnah said that, the Mishnah says, Echad minchas. Here we go. The Mishnah on Daf Vav Amud Aleph. The Mishnah says, Echas minchas chaytiv, echas kol hamenachai shekamonson zar. If the kamitza was done by a non-kohen, right? Or oinein tul yoyim mechus begadam mechus kippurim shler chatziyad v'raglav oral tamei yoshiv oimid tamei yoshiv, if the kohen was sitting, oimid standing al gabe kelim al gabe behema al gabe raglei chaveiroi. If the kohen was apostle, or the way he was doing the kamitza, he was tamei, or he was sitting, or he was standing on kelim or on an animal, or he was stepping on somebody else's foot, so his foot wasn't on the floor of the Beis Hamikdash. All these things, if this was done, and the kamitza was done this way, posel, it invalidates the kamitza. And Mishnah says, not only that, you have to do it in your right hand. Kametz bismal. If you do it in your left hand, posel, it's posel. So you would think the Tanakama holds the whole mincha has to be thrown out. But Ben Beseira says Ben Beseira I'm going to come back in a second. Ben Beseira I'm yachzer the yikmitz biyamin. Ben Beseira says that you do the kamitza again with your right hand, so you return it back into the bowl where you took it from. He would return it back into this bowl and do the kamitza with his right hand. So, and this halacha was not by just if it was done in the left hand. Even if a non-kohen did the kamitza, Rav said yachzer. According to Ben Beseira, you return it back into the bowl and redo it again. So Ben Beseira gives you a second chance. And that's important. Ben Beseira is the opinion that says you can get a second chance. Says the Gemara that this was qualified. Rabbi Yosef ben Yasin, Rabbi Yehuda Hanachtam Amru. They said in the Ben Beseira, when did Ben Beseira says you get a second chance? If you did the kamitza, but it was not thrown into the keli, it was not put already into this second keli, as you can see. If it was not put into this keli, then you get a second chance. But if it was put into the second avakidish, if you already put it into the second vessel, posel, it's posel. So that was the chiddush of the Tanoim, Rabbi Yosef ben Yasin, Ben Yehuda Hanachtaim, Yehuda the baker. They explained Ben Beseira that he's limited. You don't get a second chance after you put it into the second kli sharis. Maskef lo Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman says, Maikus Rav Tanoi. What do these Tanoim hold? If when the Zor took the kamitza, that's a pasal avoida. So afagav the loy ovid matan kli. Even if you didn't put it into the second vessel, it should be invalidated. If the pasal a person, the Zar, for example, the non-Yisrael doing the kamitza is a monkey did the kmitza, it's not considered an avoida. He avoid matan kli my hava. So even if the Yisrael took the kmitza, and let's say this was a non-kohen, and he took the kmitza and put it into a vessel, but he's a non-kohen, so it should be like a monkey. I mean, so why can't B'Meseira hold, just put it back and have a kohen do it? Hada Ama Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman explained, Lo'ilam avoidi. Really, it's an avodah zar. It's an avodah. It's a service. V'loi gamra avoidasa ada ovid le'matan kli. The service is not completed until it's put into the second vessel. So now everything makes sense. If Yisrael just did the kmitza and didn't put it into the keli, the second vessel, so he did a half a service, so then you get a second chance. But if the Yisrael, which is a zar, did the service and put it into the second vessel, so he completed a service. So he invalidated the whole mincha, even according to Ben Meseir. You don't get a second chance because the service that he did was a pasala service. Says the Gemara, Ihachi, if that's the case, because he put it into the second vessel, afilu loy kiddush, even if he didn't put it into the second vessel, because vichi, now we go back, we go daf zayin, vichi mahadele lekomitz luduchte, when he puts the kmitza back into its first place, tigdish vidlifso, then it should become kodesh and invalidate the mincha. Because what's this Yisrael gonna do? He did this kmitza. Okay, so you can tell him put it back. So if he puts it back into this vessel that they made the mincha was actually a vessel that's a klisharis. You see, but prior to the kmitza, the kohen actually brought it towards the wall, the west-south wall near the west-south corner of the mizbeach. So it was in a klisharis already. So when he's going to put it back, it's like being mekadesh the kmitza in a klisharis. So that should invalidate the service. Now you have the proof to the following halacha. Klisharis a mekachin el midas. A klisharis will not make it holy only if the kohen did it with intention to be mekadesh it. Since the Yisrael, we're talking about a Yisrael who did the kmitza, when he's returning it back to the vessel, he's regretting what he's doing. So he doesn't want the kmitza to have any kedusha to it. So when he returns it back to the vessel, it doesn't get its kedusha. The kmitza doesn't get its kedusha, whereby now we have a second chance for a regular kohen to do the kmitza. Hobidas, but if the Yisrael returned it with intention to be mekadesh, would it be mekudesh? Well, boy, Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, Kli Shares, Maoshi Katzepsul, Nakif Kili Karev. If the Yisrael did the kmitza and put it into a holy vessel, can you bring it onto the Mizbeach? Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan. V'amalei, Rish Lakish says, Ein Mekachin. Rabbi Yochanan said it doesn't work. So we see that the Yisrael doing the kedusha and the Kli Shares doesn't make it holy to bring it onto the Mizbeach. So you can't bring this onto the Mizbeach once you put it into that vessel, if Yisrael put it into that vessel. So we see from there that a Yisrael putting it into a vessel will not become Kedush to put it onto the Mizbeach. It would not be able to be offered a Mizbeach. Amalei, so we answered back, Ein Mekachin Likarev. Of course you can't put it on the Mizbeach because Yisrael put it into the second vessel. Ava Mekachin Lipasim becomes holy enough that now it becomes invalid. The whole mincha becomes invalid. So again, if Yisrael did this whole service, he took the kmitza and with intention put it back or put it into another vessel, it invalidates the entire mincha. You have to throw the whole thing out because a Yisrael is doing it, and Yisrael is apostle. It could invalidate it, but despite being despite being in a holy vessel, you cannot bring it onto the mizbeach. That's for sure. Anyway, Rav Amram asks the question like this. Rav Amram gives another answer. Really, I could say that even if there's no intention, even if the Yisrael put it back into the first vessel, it would become holy and would invalidate the whole mincha, because you don't need das, you don't need intention to be mekadesh the kmitza, but you need it to go into the vessel. Kigoin shechzira levusha kedusha. He put it back into the first vessel, but the first vessel looked like this. The first vessel looked like this. You see my picture over here with it's heaped with flour. So when he put the kamitza back, he put it on top of the heaped flour, and it never went into the vessel. So the Gemara asked, "Hey, chametz, then how did he take the kamitza in the first place?" So then the Gemara says, "Elo, kegoin shechsira levusa tevufa." Actually, he took the kamitza. How was he going to be able to take the kamitza in the first place? That the flour had to be mekudesh in the vessel. So the Gemara says, okay, the kamitza happened in a flat. The flour was filled up to the rim, and he took a kamitza. So the Gemara says, if he took the kamitza, when he returned it back, it goes back to the same place. Even the comments of a leguma, since when you took the kamitza, you made a hole. When you're going back to the hole, the mana kamahada, you're putting it back into the hole. So it becomes mekudesh automatically. As you can see in this picture, you see when he does the kamitza, he makes a hole, and then when he puts it back into that hole, it's going to be mekadesh, because Rabbi Amr holds that even shloi medas, even if he has no intention that this kamitza should become kadesh, it will become kadesh. So the Gemara says, really, he didn't return it into the hole. He returned it on top of the keli, not in the hole. So it's not mekudesh. Then he shakes it and it goes back into the hole. So when he shakes it, it's not considered a human put it back into the hole. It's like a monkey that put it back in the hole. That's what he says. When he returned it, it became on the side of the vessel. And he shakes it and falls right into the hole. It's as if a monkey returned it to the spot, and therefore the kamitza does not become kadosh, and therefore you get a second chance for a regular kohen to do the kamitza. Says the Gemara, Amalei Rabbi Yirmi says to Rabbi Zera, the loikma. We're going to go into a new topic over here, which we can answer this question. Hold on. Okay. Says the Gemara, the loikme. Oops. The screen is giving me problems. Okay. Amalei Rabbi Yirmi Rabbi Zera, the loikme kagoin shechzira lekli hamunach al gabe karka. Let us say that he returned it to. You could give an answer that why do you get a second chance? Because the Yisrael returned the kamitza, and the original vessel is not being held by another kohen, as in this picture, right? And there's a picture where it's being held by another kohen. It's on the floor, and therefore it doesn't become kadosh. It's returned to a vessel that's on the floor. Even if the kli was on the floor, it would be mekadesh. You could do a kamitza and mekadesh the kamitza, even if the keli is on the floor. Even if the kli sharis is on the floor, if you put the kamitza there, it would become like that. And the Gemara says that as a statement, but the Gemara is going to conclude that you could do that. Says the Gemara, Nagat, Rab Zera said, Nagat, the boya di boya lon. Rababini, you're touching on a topic that was already in previous generations. They asked this question. First, the Gemara says, the Rababini, Tana Menachos be Rav Chizda. Rababini went to learn Masechta Menachos in the yeshiva of Rav Chizda. So the Gemara interrupts that statement. How could Avimi come to learn from Masechta Menachos from Rav Chizda? Rav Chizda was the teacher. Abimi was the Rebbe of Rav Chizda. Says the Gemara of Abimi be Rav Chizda. Tani Abimi went to Rav Chizda to learn Masechta Menachos. Rav Chizda says, "Kul fitavi balim Abimi Allah the Hashmaitza." I swallowed good musar, or good petch, so to speak, from Avimi on the following Hashmaitza. It means Rav Chizda learned by Avimi, and Avimi explained to Rav Chizda a certain thing in Masechta Eresin. That Avimi says, explained to Rav Chizda, Avimi explained to Rav Chizda that when you're trying to sell the assets of Yesoimim to pay off a debt of their late father. So if you're announcing the auction every day, then all you need is 30 days. If the auction is if you're only announcing it Monday and Thursdays, then you need to have this go for 60 days. Whatever it is, but we see Avimi was the teacher of Rav Chisda, not the other way around. And says the Gemara, this time with Masechta Menachos, Avimi came to Rav Chisda. Why? Avinu Masechta is Akerle. Avimi totally forgot Masechta of Menachos. But also coming to Rav Chisda lat kori Gemara. And he came to Rav Chisda to help him remind him Masechta Menachos. Fascinating thing. He came to his Talmud to re-jog his memory. Says the Gemara of Lishlach Le Gabe. So why didn't Avimi, who's the master, call for Rav Chisda to come to his house to teach him Masechta Menachos? So the Gemara says, and this is a good lesson. Sovar Avimi held Hochi Mistaya Milsitve. I'll be more successful. I'll have more siyata d'shmaya if I go to Rav Chisda and make myself uncomfortable going to Rav Chisda to learn Masechta Menachos from him, and that's how I'll remember it better. So on the way back, Pogabe Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman met Avimi as he finished Masechta Menachos with Rav Chisda. Amalei, Rav Nachman asked, Keitzit Kamtzin, how do you do Kmitza? Amalei, Avimi pointed Miklizeh from this bowl over here. Amalei, Rav Nachman asked Avimi, Vichid Kamtzin Mikli Shal Galbe Karka. Can you do Kmitza on a vessel that's on the floor? Amalei, the Madvele coin. No, another coin lifts it up. Another coin lifts it up. So the Gemara says, Keitzid. So then the Gemara asks, Rav Nachman continue ask, Keitzid Mekachim Menachos. How did we Mekadesh Menachos? How he asked Avimi, Rav Nachman continue asking Avimi, how you do the Kedusha of the Menachos? Amalei, nice l'klizeh. You could put it into another vessel. Can you do the Kedusha Kedusha into another kli that's on the floor? Amalei demagmalei kain. Another coin lifts it up. So basically, Ravimi held that when you do the kamitza, another coin has to be lifting this as the coin is doing kamitza, right? As he's doing kamitza, another coin is lifting the vessel. And then as you putting the kamitza into another vessel, klisharis, another coin is holding on to the vessel. So it comes out, you need 3 kahanim. 1 coin to hold the original vessel, 1 coin to do the kamitza, and 1 coin to hold the vessel where you're going to put the kamitza into that vessel. So now, Amalei, so Rav Nachman asked, in Hekain, Hitzrachta Gimel Kahanim. To do kamitza, you're going to need 3 kahana. Amalei. So Rabbi said, I have no problem with that. Gimel. You could even, it's not a problem. There's not a shortage of kahanim. We find sometimes you need 13 kahanim to complete a service. Ketamid, like the carbon tamid every morning, you need your 13 kahanim. So on a regular mincha, you're going to need 3 kahanim. So that's Avimi's opinion. So Avimi had this opinion that you actually cannot do kamitza when the vessel is on the table or on the floor, and you cannot be mekadesh after you take the kamitza. You cannot be mekadesh with the vessel that's on the floor. The Gemara says, "Esvei." Let me ask you a question. The Mishnah is describing who can do kamitza, who can do pigel, who can make this mincha pigel. So you can have the person that's doing the kamitza, the one that's bringing it to the mizbeach, the one that's makter it. In other words, every person along in this service, as you see in the picture, after the kamitza and the halacha and the makter, any one of people doing these services can make the korban pigel. But what about this guy, the one holding it, the one holding the vessel? He could also make a kamitza, and the Mishnah doesn't say that. That's the question. Vili matbia, the one holding the vessel, like a tani. It doesn't say that he could also make it pigel. So we see that you didn't need a kohen to hold the vessel. Answers the Gemara, Tana, say the avoidus not say the kahanim. He could also make it. He can make it pigel, but he's not part of the services, and therefore he's not counted. The Takana is not listing off how many Kahanim you need for a mincha. The Takana is just giving you general rules that anybody involved in the service can make the mincha pigel. But the truth be told, that even the one holding the vessel could also make the mincha pigel. So now the Gemara is going to go back into this question. They asked from Rav Sheshes, can they do the kmitza if the vessel is on the floor? Rav Sheshes says, well, that's how they do it in the Beis Hamikdash every week, every Shabbos. If you take a look at the picture, every Shabbos, they right over here. Here's the picture. You had two people, four kahanim. Okay, two koyans would lift the breads off the table, and two koyans would take the mezichan. One each would take one of the scoops, and these scoops were full of levina, and they would throw it on the mizbeach. Well, taking it off is like the kamitza. Taking it off the table is like the kamitza. And we didn't need another kohen to lift the table. That's what the Gemara is going to say. And then they had four kahanim bring new breads to the table. And two kohanim, one kohen brought 6 breads, another kohen brought 6 breads, and another two kohanim each brought the levina. So the Gemara's proof is that we didn't need a kohen when they took the spoons off the shulchan to lift the table, so it's not on the floor. That's what you said. Amalei, the Brisa says, every Shabbos 4 koyens would go into the heichal, shnayim biyodim, each 2 in their hands. 2 of them had beis darim, each one had 6 loaves. So you have 2 koyens each holding 6 loaves. Ushnayim biyodim shnei bezichem, and 2 had fresh bezichin. Each one held a spoon of bezichin. V'abba mekadlim name. And before they arrived, there was another 4 kahan to remove the old breads. Shnayim litil shnei sadarm. 2 took off each one took 6 breads off the table. Ubeis litil beis bezichin. You had 2 kohanim to take one of each. One took 1 spoon, the other took the other spoon off the table. The ilu, we go to Amid Beis, Ayin Amid Beis, the ilu magbia asashulchan like Katari. It doesn't say we needed somebody to lift the table. So we see that you could do the kamitza, because taking the spoon off the table is like the kamitza, and you can still do it on the table. You don't need a kohen to lift the table. V'il magbia asashulchan like Katari. It doesn't say that somebody lifted the table. So therefore, it's proof that you could do kmitza from a kli that's on the karka. And says Gemara, lav amr hasam say that avodas nakas, achanami say that avodas nakas. Could be true. Maybe they did need a kohen to lift the table, but the Mishnah is just discussing the actions, but not discussing the amount of kahanim that were needed. So the Gemara says no. Midami. Awesome, like nachas l'minyan the kahanim. You could answer that in the first question that I asked you, that the Tana is not counting the kahanim. Here, our Tana is trying to count how many kahanim were needed in this service, and it needed 8, 4, and 4. So it's really describing how many kahanim were needed in this service. And in Isa, if you needed another kohen to lift the table, then we should have another kohen lifting the table. From here you prove, from here you see that the kamitza can be done on the karka, on the floor, shmamina. And therefore, the Gemara could not have answered the teretz that Ben Beseira, how could you return it to the keli, put it on the floor, and it wouldn't become holy? Yes, it would become holy if you put the kamitza back onto the vessel that's on the floor, because it doesn't matter where the vessel is, it will be mekadesh the kamitza. So the Gemara gave other terutzim, that you didn't put it in the vessel, etc. Amar Rava. Rava said, Pshitili is very simple to me. You could do the kmitza from a kli that's on the karka. Again, this vessel that you're doing the kmitza from could be on the floor. like we find in the removing of the two spoons that were on the shulchan, that you could take off the kmitza, take the bezichen off the table, and you didn't need a coin to lift the table. Before the kmitza, you could actually make the mincha in a keli that's on the floor. So in other words, you could actually put the flour, right? You can make once you made the mincha, this teli could be on the floor. You don't need another kohen holding it. It could be on the floor, right? Because you need this vessel to be holy, so the kohen could first do the hagasha. So this keli, when you make the mincha, could be on the floor, because they put the bezichen, when they put it on the table, which is as if like putting the flour in the vessel, the shulchan, nobody lifted it. So the Gemara asks a question. Boy, Rava said, Kiddush koimitz maya. What about be mekadesh? This was the question that Rava had, which was the same idea, but when you do you need another kohen over here or not? Maybe over here, the first vessel could be on the floor, but when he takes the kamitza and gives it to, makes the kedusha into another vessel, maybe you do need a kohen to hold the vessel, because when he does kamitza, that is, if you remember from the first daf, that's like the shchita of the carbon. Let's call it shchita. This, when he puts it the kamitza in a vessel, that's called the kabbalah. Kabbalah, it's like by the animal, where you need another vessel to hold the blood in, right? So the question was, do you learn it from the original vessel, and you could do it with the keli on the floor, or is that like catching the blood, and you need another kohen to hold a vessel? The pashtus, Rava said, you learn it from the blood, and you do need another kohen. So the truth, the bottom line is, for the first kmitza could be done when it's on the floor, but to be mekadesh the kmitza in a keli, there you need a kohen to be holding a vessel, because you learn it from dam, and they're just like the blood. You need a kohen holding to catch the blood. You need another kohen to catch the kmitza. And in fact, the Gemara says, did Rava say that? Yama Rava Hachi. We learned if you divided the kmitza into two vessels, right? Each one not having the shmir kmitza, Rava says it works. Rav Nachman says it doesn't work. Rav Nachman says it doesn't work because if you catch blood in two vessels, it's not going to work either. You need the shir hazah to be caught in one vessel. So just like dam doesn't work, kamitza doesn't work. But Rava says you don't learn from dam, and therefore kamitza could be worked. It can be effective even if you divided the kamitza into two vessels. Then Isa, if Rava held that kamitza is like Kabbalah Sadam, Leilif Midam, let him learn from dam and align himself with the opinion of Rav Nachman. And says the Gemara, yes, Hadabe Rava, but Rava retracted. Rava holds as Eina Kodesh because the kamitza, the catching of the kamitza is like Kabbalah Sadam, and therefore it cannot be done in two vessels. It can only be done in one vessel. So now the Gemara asks, V'dam analam deloy Kodesh lechatzoin. How do I know blood will not work if you catch it in two vessels? Tani Rav Tachlifa bar Shol. Rav Tachlifa says, Rav Tachlifa ben Shol taught us this then. Kidesh pachas mikdei hazah b'klizeh, or pachas mikdei hashra b'klizeh. In the Efa para, okay, where you put a little bit of water with the ashes of the para aduma, but in a vessel that doesn't have the shear of hazah. What is the shear of hazah? To be able to stick the azov into and still make it wet. So if you have it in two vessels and it didn't have the shear hazah, so then like kiddush, the water did not become holy, obviously. The boile bedamal, can you do the same thing by blood? Put it half a shear of kabbalah sadam in one keli and half a shear in another keli. That's what they asked Rav Khalifa. And the question was, I don't know if they asked Rav Khalifa, but they asked this in the Beis Medrash. And the question was, Hilkasihi, is this only a unique halacha by paraduma waters? And Mihilchas Yafinin, and we're not going to learn from that halacha to karbanos, Dilma, or maybe Hasamaitama. What's the reason why this is invalid by kiddush of the paraduma waters, the ksiv, the tavel b'mayim? You have to dip in water, and that the water had to be a sheer hazor from the very first time. Hochanami, here also the tavel badam, when it says you have to dip your finger in the blood, it has to be caught in a vessel that had the shear from the get-go. Not that you caught half a shear in two different vessels and then mixed it. So that's the itma. So that was the question. The itma we learned even by blood it doesn't work. You have to catch the blood in one vessel, and the shear of hazor of the blood have to be caught in one vessel, not a half a shear. Amar Rava Tanyanami Hachi. We learned so. V'tavel v'loy misapik. Badam v'tavel bakoy badam, and not v'loy maspik misapik. He doesn't. He has to actually dip his finger in the blood, and he v'loy misapik. He can't I guess v'loy misapik means wipe his finger on the sides of the keli. That's what I meant. That's loy misapik. The dam, it has to be in the blood. Shehei b'dam shir tvila mikari. It had to be in the blood that had the sheer tvila from the very get-go. From the very get-go, it had to have the sheer tvila on it. Okay, let me see. Yeah, it had to have from the very get-go. It had to be a sheer tvila. And we learn another thing, hadam, the blood, min adam shebe'inyan. Something special is unique about the blood. We're going to learn that even after you dip the blood and you sprinkled once, let's say they sprinkled towards the curtain, or you sprinkle by the paraduma, you sprinkle towards the opening of the Beis Hamikdash, you had to dip your hand, the kohen had to dip his finger into the keli 7 times, and he couldn't do it twice, with the same finger. And then we're going to learn that you had to clean your finger before you dip again. So I need the tavel and you need the blood. If the Torah would have written the tavel means, I would think that as long as there's blood in that vessel, that's fine, even though this is not the original vessel. So the Torah wrote badam, and the original vessel had to have caught the sheer dam in order to validate the sprinkling. The ikas of Rahman badam, if the Torah just wrote badam, havevila afilam sapek, I would think that you don't have to stick your finger into the kohen didn't have to stick his finger into the vessel. He could actually, stick his finger on the outside of the vessel if there's blood there. That's why the Torah wrote v'tavel. Min hadam shebe'inin mutamai. So what is min hadam? So what does that exclude? Amarava lemute shirayim shebe'atzma. As I explained, even if he has leftover blood on his finger, it's invalid. You have to stick your finger 7 times into the blood. Messiah Rab Lazar, this is a proof to what Rab Lazar said. Amar Rab Lazar, shirayim shebe'atzma psulim. The leftover on your finger is invalid. Amalei Ravin Rav Ada Bar Ada Rava. So Ravin Bar Ada said to Rava, Amri Talmidcha Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Amram, your student Rav Amram said a brisa, and from that brisa it will seem that you could use the leftover blood on the finger, because Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Now kosher blood to sprinkle that ends up on the beged of a kohen has to be washed. So hoya mazza, as he's sprinkling, the nitza hazom yodei, and that some of the blood fell from his finger onto from his hand and onto his clothing. If it was prior to finishing the sprinkling, toin kibbutz, you need to wash the beged. You have to wash your clothing. Mishihiza, if you finish the sprinkling, ain toin kibbutz, you don't have to wash your big day kuna. My love, goma hazasai until umishagoma hazasai means that until you finish sprinkling. If somehow after you did, let's say, 2 sprinklings, there's a little blood on your finger, and that ended up on a shirt, so then it needs hazah. Then he needs to wash the beged. So this must be the leftover of his finger must have been kosher blood to be sprinkled, and that's why you have to wash your clothing. Shma mina, from here you see, shirayim de be'etzba kashem, the leftovers from his fingers are kosher to be sprinkled. So the Gemara says, loy, ach lo yatzum yode hazah toinkimus. That means as soon as he didn't fling it, and that blood, before he made the first fling, ended up on his clothing, then you have to wash the clothing. Let's say he did a sprinkling, and somehow after the sprinkling, some of the leftover blood ended up on his clothing. That's the pshat in the brisa. Ein toin kibbutz. You don't have to wash the clothing. Eisvei Abaya. So Abaya asked, Goma lahazos. The brisa, the Mishnah says, when he completed the hazoi, you see the kohen on doing the service of the, let's say here he is, he did the service of on Har Zaysim, he's doing the service of sprinkling towards the base of Mikdash, the opening of the base of Mikdash. You can see over here, he finishes the service, he goes down to the animal, and the animal is a little bit lower on the mountain. He goes down to the animal and washes the remaining blood from his hands, his entire hands, onto the animal, and then burn the entire animal. So, then he washes his hand entirely, wipes his hand on the body of the paraduma, and the paraduma is burnt. Goma, unless he's finished with the 7 hazois, the 7 sprinklings. Loy gomar, if he didn't complete it, loy, because the blood on his hand could still be used as sprinkling blood. Amalei, gomar, when he's finished all 7, then he goes back to the cow and wipes his entire hand on the cow. Loy gomar, but if he didn't complete it, you wipe your finger. So you just wipe your finger, but you don't have to wipe your entire hand. So the Gemara says, Bishlam going on in Kanech Yoda Begufe Shal Para. Bishlam, I understand if you complete, you wipe your body, you wipe your hand in the entire body of the paraduma. Except the service of paralainav, you have to burn the entire cow, and whatever is in the entire cow, including its blood, you have to burn. Eloy Gomar Mekaneach Be'etzboy. If you didn't complete the sprinkling, and you can't sprinkle it because you stuck the kohen stuck his finger, sprinkled once towards the base of Mikdash, and he has to do another 6 more sprinklings, and he's not going to go down to the cow to where it's down the mountain to wipe his finger there, but he can't use that sprinkling again on his finger. The my mekaneach, then how he's going to wipe his, and what will he wipe his finger off of that blood? We skip the parentheses. Amar Abaya, Abaya says, B'svas migzers, on the edge of the keli, kiksiv kipayre zav, like on the edge of the mizrak, and they called mizrakin kipore zav. You wipe it off, the golden wipe, so to speak. So because you wipe your finger there, so that's why mizrak was a wipe. So what is a mizrak? Let's go look at the keli. Here's a keli of a mizrak. He wiped it. This is a wiping. So it served to hold the blood, and it and he wiped his finger in between. When you complete all 7, that's when the kohen went down to the cow and just wiped his hand on top of the entire blood off his hands, and then they burnt the cow. What's this whole point? The whole point is that what the Gemara just wanted to prove, and this will end, that the kamitza when the kohen takes the kamitza, he has to put it into another vessel. That other vessel must be held by another kohen, because the other kohen is doing, so to speak, the Kabbalah, just like the Kabbalah Saddam. And just like Kabbalah Saddam cannot be done in halfway, in two different vessels. So also Gemara proved that the kamitza cannot be done in two different vessels. You have to do it in one vessel. But never, the main point is that you can't have this vessel on the table. It has to be held by another kohen, just like Kabbalah Saddam also had to be held by another kohen. Okay, we'll stop over here.